All right. Hey, this is my name's Jeremy with the Mama Tried Flat Out Friday bi-weekly.
Weekly.
Uh,
Been sticking to a schedule.
yeah, a podcast. Number 50. 58.
If you say so.
And we have a guest here, Bert Sumner, the man of many hats.
Yes.
Many hats.
Yes. Local promoter and from Flat Track family royalty.
Yeah.
Right?
We would.
I don't think that's. I don't think
that,
that's. I don't think that's an overstatement.
No, I don't think it's an overstatement at all. And a mentor.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. So
Try
thanks
to
for
be.
coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right.
Why don't you just give me a quick surmise, Bert? What's the state of Wisconsin flat track nationally? How's our garden?
Nationally, it's the national circuit is a very tough nut to crack. As far as the Wisconsin guys that are active in it, Morgan Mischler is on the factory Honda team in the AFT singles division. He's in the top 10 in points. And I believe Jacob Walter from Amory has an AFT singles license. He hasn't gone to a lot of races this year, but it's just hard. So every year they have the amateur nationals, which are the culmination or the big amateur race in the country, or a series of races where they award the national championships. And the best rider over that whole week, they give what's called the Horizon Award. And that's supposed to be the rider that has the brightest future for a professional career. And an individual from, I think he's from Mansfield, Ohio, Clarky Moran, won the Horizon Award last year, and he turned pro this year, and he's been struggling just to make main events, just because it's so hard to make a main event. And part of it is that in my day, the goal was to get expert. So as soon as you got points, most everyone moved up to the junior rank, and once they got their points, moved up to expert. There's no forced progression now, and so if Loyal were to get his pro license and go pro, he would line up at his first race likely against people who've been racing in that class for 10 or 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of experience for him to try to overcome it with youthful exuberance, and he might be able to, better than once or twice, but over the long run,
You get pounded down.
Right.
Pounded down.
What I'm fishing for is I want you to say Wisconsin flat track is strong, but you're not saying that.
Well, I think the events that we have typically have like 300 entries, except the ones we promote. But they also have like 25 classes. So it's a completely different mindset now than it was when I started racing. When I started racing in '79, the philosophy was there's a race going on. What class can I fit into? And let's go race. And now it seems the philosophy is unless I can race the 4 classes that I'm used to racing, I'm not going at all. And so I think that locally we have it's almost kind of a Jekyll and Hyde thing that we've got. In the state, I think we've got maybe 8 different racetracks that we race on, but 2 of them are the vast majority. I think Estlin and Beaver Cycle Club do like 75% of the races. And so you can go to those 2 races and vie for a championship. You don't have to go to all the other one-off racetracks.
Right.
And, so you end up with people that are really, really good at those 2 racetracks, but they don't have a lot of experience at other racetracks.
Outside of that.
Right. Whereas the people that are racing, especially at the pro level, they're racing a different racetrack every weekend. And so and you have to be good. You have to be able to show up at a racetrack and just look at the track and already have an idea where you're going to be gearing wise and tire pressure wise and all that stuff. When I was racing, you had your half mile gearing that you started with, and after your first practice, you knew how far off you were. But now guys are so tuned in, they can look at a track and say, this is shaped just like that other track from over here, and pull out the book of notes and say, yeah, we're going to put this gear on, and they're fast right out of the gate. You don't see a whole lot of, significant changes in lap times as they're experimenting, because they have to be, they got to be good right away. And that's the other challenge of trying to go pro, is that the way that they, like when I did it, you would go out and you would do like 2 practices, and then you do a 1-lap qualifier. And then if you were one of the fastest 24 at a local race or 48 at the or at the national level, you'd then race a heat race. And now the way they have it is you run 1 practice, and now you're qualifying. The next 2 4-lap practice sessions, you're qualifying. And if at the end of those 8 total laps, if you're not one of the fastest 32, you put it in the truck and you go home. Which, if you load it up and went all the way to Daytona and race 12 laps and realize you're not one of the fastest 32, that's a long drive home.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I remember when I was first starting and I was talking to a bunch of old timers like your dad, Al, and he was saying that back in the day, on a Wednesday night at Cedarburg, there would be 400 or 500 people would show up, and they would have heat races with like 20 guys in them or 40 guys in them, and they would take two and send everybody else send them home, right? Is that sort of true?
What they would kind of do is they would do like 12 or 15 rider heat races, as many as they needed, especially with the novice class in the 70s. They would have 400 novices show up, and you only put 12 in the main event. So everyone got a heat race, and if you won your heat, you still had to be one of the 12 fastest heat races, or else you went home.
Wow.
And that was just because there were just so many
people.
Novices. Right.
Wow. That's wild.
What did it cost you back then? What was the entry fee?
I remember signing up in '85 for Santa Fe Speedway. I paid $15 to race, and I got fourth in the main event and got $40, $50. I think.
Right.
That's awesome. I have a bunch more questions about back in the day, but there's this mythology around Santa Fe.
Which is in where? What town?
It's in
Hinsdale, Illinois, which is just southwest of Chicago.
Okay.
Right. And it's gone now.
It's
right?
been gone. I think they bulldozed it over in '91. I think.
Wow, that long ago.
Hard to believe.
But it was like that was the epicenter, really, of because they raced there twice a week.
They would race every Wednesday, and then the last Friday of the month would be a TT. So from April till September, you could race there. Do the math of how many times a week, but 4 Wednesdays and a Friday. Every month you could go there, and if that was 3 or 4 months, you could. You could easily get your junior points in the course of a month if you went down there. It was pretty good.
Wow, and a lot of people would show up, right?
A lot of people would, and it was kind of back then. It was almost a national every weekend where you would see. Randy Goss was there with the number 1 plate, and Steve Eklund was there with the number 1 plate, and that we just thought that was normal. And that now
and they weren't based in Chicago.
We were not. We were in Milwaukee, but it's a 2-hour drive on a Wednesday.
But for those guys, where were they based? Where were they out of?
Randy Goss was out of Heartland, Michigan, which was over in the mitt of Michigan somewhere. And Steve Eklund was from San Jose, California, but he was staying in the Midwest, somewhere in Illinois with his sponsors probably. But it was an opportunity. Those guys would race like Granite City, Illinois, had a short track Tuesday nights, Santa Fe Wednesday night. What was it? Auto City, I think in Flint, Michigan was Friday night, and then there was some half miles on Saturday and Sunday they would go to, so they could go and race. I was talking with Charlie Chappell, who won the 72, I think, or 1971 Santa Fe Track Championship. He was from Flint, Michigan, and in 71, he said at one point, me and my sponsor were looking at whatever, and they'd made $1,500 a week just racing motorcycles.
I had heard that you could race, 5-6 days a week for money back then and make a living at it.
Yep, and most of them were fair races, so they were, it was a self-fulfilling kind of a thing because you put on a motorcycle race, nobody had phones in their pockets. The TV only had 3 stations. Nothing better to do. Let's go spend $1 and go to the motorcycle races, and they were fairly well run, well attended, and so the promoter was making money, so he was putting money back into the purse. And it's a similar thing, honestly, what I did with the Dairyland Classic when I started, that when the Formula, I took it over in 2001, and we did 3 Formula USA Nationals, and then that series folded, and we decided, all right, let's try again in 2004 on our own as an AMA event, and we figured, well, we can afford to lose $3,000, so let's put $3,000 into the purse. And we did that, and fortunately, most of the people that were there last year showed up again, and so we made a little bit of money. So the next year we did a $5,000 purse, and same thing happened the next year. And so every year we've been able to put more and more money into the purse to pay the riders, to reward them for coming to help us put on a show.
Yeah.
And it's, we've always had the philosophy, or I've always had the philosophy, never spend more than you can afford to lose.
Right.
And if you do that, you'll be all right.
You didn't tell me that one.
Yeah. Somebody write that down.
Got it.
I'm not the smartest guy around, but I've seen mistakes that other people have made.
Right.
And, I try to learn from, I try to borrow the things that other promoters do that I think are really cool. I borrow those, and the things that they do poorly, I make a point of not doing those.
Right.
And I see some promoters out there, and they just kind of make the same mistake over and over and over again. You go, well, okay, if that's what you want to do, but
it doesn't have to be that way.
Right. It could be so much better if you just learned from how often do you want to go to a dusty racetrack before you just go, I'm not going to that racer's show anymore?
Yeah.
I never like going to a dusty racetrack. That's why my key thing when I put on a race is I don't want any dust. I don't want anyone to complain about, dust. Now, there are times where you have it early on in practice until everything brushes off. But for the most part, I don't want anyone going blind into a corner at 70 miles an hour because I didn't like doing it.
Right.
I want to pause for a second. And people that don't know, you already mentioned you wear many hats. You were a flat track racer. You just established a high level. And you also are a promoter.
Yes.
So those that don't know, tell us, in a couple sentences, what is the Dairyland Classic?
The Dairyland Classic is Wisconsin's premier outdoor, I make a point of specifying.
It's okay.
It's the premier outdoor motorcycle flat track racing event in the state. I'm very proud of what my family and I have built. My parents started the event in '85. I took it over in 2001. And we try to do a very fast-paced, fan-oriented type event where, you buy a ticket to watch motorcycle racing, and we try to give you motorcycle racing. We don't show you the water truck going around in circles. We don't show you, ads on the jumbotron or any of that stuff. We're there to start on time. I'm very OCD with being on the spectrum of starting on time and finishing on time. And we start practice at 5 o'clock, and at 5:01, if there aren't bikes on the track, I am losing my mind. And we do our opening ceremonies at 7, and at 7 o'clock as soon as my clock says 7 o'clock, we're starting. And I'm very anal about that.
Dairyland is run like a Swiss watch. It really is. And it's a great show for anyone who hasn't gone. And anyone who has gone, they know the quality of the event. It is, there's no fluff or there's no downtime. It's just, it's the cream of the crop racing. We learned a lot from you.
Thank you.
And your family when we were trying to figure out what to do. And I mean, you guys, the Sumner family it's a flat track racing dynasty for District 16, right? You guys reffed, the Sumner family has reffed District 16 for a long time.
My father was the district ref from I think 80 or 81 until 2004 or 5.
Right. So there's never been a time that when I started flat track racing that you guys weren't doing that.
We're always doing something.
Yeah. So
my sisters occasionally get pulled out to Ashland to help with scoring.
Right.
I don't go to a whole lot of races anymore, but I'm involved I'm the chairman of the AMA Flat Track Rules Commission. So whenever there's a rules question that comes up, I try to offer my 2 cents worth in on that based on how I interpret the rules and how I've come to understand what the rule book is saying and so on and so forth.
Well, that's cool. How long have you been doing that?
They recruited me in 2018.
Okay.
Yeah.
They recruited you.
Yeah, they asked me to do it. I was voluntold.
I want to go a little bit what Scott's saying about you helping us, and that's one of the things I've noticed at the Dairyland Classic of how it's unlike every other race in that it is a fast-paced, fan-friendly show. So not only that, but I want to put down officially that you talked to me for hours of the mistakes and the things of how to run a race. And I really appreciate it. I've always said you to be my mentor.
Thank you.
So,
and I'd like to clarify, I don't think I was pointing out your mistakes, but I was pointing out mistakes maybe that I'd made or others had made.
Oh, sure.
Absolutely.
No, sure. Right. No, and I'll say that when we were first doing the event, when you were first helping me, you did point out my mistakes. And that's a healthy, you must do that to be successful in this. You cannot keep, dumping your money.
Because you're making the same mistakes.
Because it's an expensive game.
Yeah, and I've always said that the only mistake is the one you make twice. And coupled on top of that is you have to allow yourself to remember the past correctly. And there are so many people in life, not just promoting, that, no, this is what happens. Like, no, that isn't what happened.
People
if you remembered it correctly, you would know not to do this again. Right?
Sure. People do that all the time. Their wife will say, what a great event. And then they say, people are saying it's a great event. Well, no, they're not. That one person that's important to you said that.
Right.
The objective evidence tells you your race sucked.
Right, and I've stolen or borrowed a page from your book that you had said at one of the first Flat Out Fridays that we're a show, and the focus, we are a show, and I've started telling people at my riders meeting, we are a show disguised as a motorcycle race.
Sure.
Because there are so many people, especially at the local racing level, that they're all about the race. And to your point, as we talked about earlier, you marked me down as third, but I really got second. Well, what, really? We're going to talk about, I'm busy trying to do other things, but that's what they're most focused on. And sometimes, with my event, I'm not part of a series. I'm not part of a championship. So whether you get second or third, it's not going to affect the year-end outcome. We're here to be, you got to be on the line on time. You got to do what you have to do so that we can put the show on to entertain.
But that's offensive to someone that thinks that you're not taking it seriously if you make a mistake.
Absolutely.
And they don't understand. Anybody that complains about how an event is done has got to try and see all of the things that a promoter has to go through.
Everyone should try it once.
Yeah.
Right.
And on top of that, people, I think there are so many people that are involved in racing now, but they would learn a lot even if they just volunteered to help.
Right.
Sure.
And there are a lot of things that people tell us, oh, you should do this, you should do that, you should do this. Well, it's me and my family and 3 other people are doing everything.
Right.
Do you want to help out? Do you want to jump in and do this? Well, no.
Right.
That's why that's not getting done, because there's not a person there that has the bandwidth to do that additional stuff.
And when you do an event, if I can just vent a little bit with a fellow promoter, it isn't just that you got there at 7:00 when the fans got there. You were there 5 days prior, watering, curating the track. You were there at the crack of dawn to get loaded in and get your team, and you're paying a staff minimum wage, right? You're paying a couple dozen staff minimum wage because that's what you're collecting at the gate.
And the staff is there all day long.
Right.
By the time the people roll into the pit area at 2 p.m., we've already been there for 5 or 6 or 8 hours.
Mm-hmm. And then you got to do sign up, and you got to run the shoot, and you got to run the scoring, and post all the heat races and the mains and the semis, and
try to get everything straight and everything going, and then the race is over, and then you got to go and clean up other people's beer cans because they just left their pit area looking like a dump.
Yeah.
And then you put that into perspective, and then you have someone saying, "I got 5th, not 6th in the B main." Right. And you're like, "Come on!" And the priorities of things. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Right. And they want you to stop, and sometimes they come to you in the middle of the event. Just stop everything and fix this. Like, no, it's not that important.
Exactly.
I've seen that happen. I've seen people yelling at you.
Yeah. All the time. And there's 3 and I tell them at every event, the people in the grandstands are the most important people on the facility. We've been blessed over my 20 years of doing this that Jared Mees has been here a number of times with the number 1 plate. Henry Wiles has been here with the number 1 plate. Kenny Coolbeth with the number 1 plate. This past year we had both Jared Mees and Cody Kopp were here. The 2 guys wearing the number 1 plates this year.
It's pretty great.
And we've just been really blessed by their support. But I have to tell everyone, or I choose to tell everyone at every riders meeting, the people in the grandstands, they're the focus. If we keep them happy, maybe they come back next year and maybe they bring someone else. If we piss them off, they will tell everybody they know and they'll never come back. And then we can't do this again because eventually the expenses are going to outweigh the revenue, and then it's not worth doing it anymore.
Right.
Your show is certainly star-studded when I think back at the last Pro Mean. And one more thing too about your event that I think makes it so great is the fairgrounds itself. It's covered, has the covered grandstands, and it has a unique sound.
Yeah,
right.
With the bikes
echoing inside of the covered grandstands.
That helps with the aluminum bleachers they have. It echoes. If it was wood, it would be more dampened, and you wouldn't hear that.
You see the nuances of promoting. It's beautiful.
Yeah. And the sun when the sun sets in the west, the grandstands have their back, so it helps sort of like shade the track a little bit. And it's great. I mean, we're lucky with Flat Out Friday that we don't have to deal with weather as much,
other than snow.
Yeah. Exactly. But you have to deal with weather every year.
Every year.
And been lucky the last couple of years.
Been blessed. Been very blessed.
When was the last time that there was
an R situation?
Yeah.
I remember 2008, it R'd really hard. We don't say the R word because it's like Beetlejuice. If you say it often enough, it just shows up. So we don't say that. Yes. But 2008, I remember we R'd out. And then we reran it in August, and I think there was another one after that, like maybe 2010, 2011. But I remember there was one year, no, it was 2015, it R'd really hard right before. I remember I was standing in under the pop-up tent with Henry Wiles watching it R very, very hard. And that was the year that Jared Mees jumped the start and won it from the back row.
Oh, wow.
So the event got off.
We finished the event, and we finished it on time. We started like an hour late. We scrapped the semis and just went heats and finals.
What do you call it with the grater thing? You scrape the mud off?
We waited about an hour for it to get stiff enough that we could get the grater out, and we bladed it out, did some wheel packing, and it was the photos I remember, there's just big clods of mud on the infield, but it was hard packed from top to bottom, and that's. I still suspect that maybe Jared jumped the line on purpose because he just knew he was just going to go around everybody. But it was just so neat to see him knifing through the pack.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
I also have. I think that there's some sort of special status that the Dairyland Classic has, because I've seen fronts on my phone, and they're coming up, and then it just goes right around the track. It just opens up and goes right around the track, and then resumes its storminess.
Yeah.
Once it's past the racetrack.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen it happen, and it's amazing how it ends up being.
Sometimes it
coming off
works
like that.
You know, I used to stress out about the weather a lot, and then at some point I just put it in God's hand and said, God, if you want it to rain, who am I to judge? But I just ask that you just make it so hard that it's not even debatable.
Sure. There's that. Oh, yeah.
Just pack it up.
Just right, Monday through whatever, just the whole month. Just if you're gonna do it, Lord, just let loose. Because I have sat there on the infield and listened to, it's gonna be a great week. Had the radio blowing as I'm putting stuff up, and it's gonna be a beautiful weekend. And then there's a chance of R, and then big chance of R, and then oh my gosh, it's gonna. And I've also had the other way around where they've said, 100% chance of thunderstorms. Don't even leave your house today, and never even saw a flicker of lightning anywhere.
Right.
Being that close to the lake, you just never know. And I've seen times on my phone where just sitting at my house while I look at the phone and go, the entire state of Wisconsin should be underwater, and there's not a drop anywhere falling. So I don't put any faith in weather forecasts.
You have a great staff also work with you for that race. But you have a great track prep team. What's the loose science between?
They work that.
Yeah.
Dale Bauman is the master. He's the main track prep guy up at the Sheboygan County Fairgrounds. He's been with me for 21 of the last 22 years.
He does all the events there? Just you?
Yes, he does all the events.
And so he came with the track, so you got to know him that way. So he knows that surface.
He does, and more importantly, he's learned what we need. See, when my parents started the event, just like, honestly, any car track you go to, it's a language barrier. Go put a little bit of water on the racetrack. What does that mean to anyone?
Right.
Motorcycle guy thinks do a little misting, but to a car guy that does car races, and they do car races every Saturday night, a little bit of water is go and open the spigot and let it.
Right.
Well, and that's way too much for a motorcycle. So the first 10, 15 years of the Dairyland Classic was a very arduous. There's too much water. There's not enough water. You go back and read the race reports, which I wrote most of them, and track was crap, and track was iffy, and track was this, track was that, and it's because it's a language barrier. You're speaking French, they're speaking Italian, and it's similar, but you almost have to. It's just very challenging, and there are so many people throughout the world that are track prep experts that never leave their keyboard. But every batch of dirt is different, and
and
what kind of water, you're using, and
sun, and even that grandstand could keep the front stretch wet and the back stretch dry, right?
Yes. Very much so.
And then when nighttime comes, it brings the moisture up out of the ground, right? So if you add too much water because you're trying to chase that sun away, and then it's coming back to bite you after the sun goes down.
And that was kind of a challenge that we had this year, was that it was so dry. We haven't had a lot of rain here in Wisconsin all year long, and they were fighting it every week with the car show. And and if you remember, the first practice this year was quite a bit on the dusty side as we were trying to blow that top layer off. But you could go in with a knife and stick it in a quarter inch deep, and there was water. The ground was moist underneath there because they'd been soaking the track all week long. But with the sun, no clouds, and a high wind, it just evaporates right off the top. Wow. But once we got that top blown off, we didn't have any dust problems the rest of the night, and we were able to then just maintain and get the track nice and wide to where we had some really great racing all night long, where it wasn't just a one-line racetrack, because that's not very exciting for anyone, the racers or the spectators.
Right.
We could go ahead. Do you have something else?
I was going to touch on what you had said when you were expert, that you weren't. Maybe you knew that your ability wasn't quite at the top level, and so you were going to races with Jim and your dad.
Yep.
And because you've become such a good promoter, do you think that you were learning, like you were taking an interest? I remember you telling a story, or maybe it was your sisters were telling a story one time at a race about how you guys would go to races, and on the way to the races you would talk about tracks and stats, and so like I feel like you've had a keen interest in like the statistics and the machinations of flat track racing, not just who won what race where, but how the whole thing works, like from getting there to track prep to sign up, and just how the whole, as a promoter, you've had a keen interest in. Well, you've been around it a long time, so you've absorbed a lot. But even when you were young, do you remember having an interest in it?
I had no interest in being a promoter at all. It got thrown at me quite by happenstance. When we were younger in racing, you didn't have CDs. We had 8 tracks, but we didn't have a lot of those.
Right.
So you spent a lot of time either listening to static on the radio or listening to the wind whistling, or my brother and I would do racing trivia. Who was novice number 83C in 1983, and who was this, and who won that race. Not so much who won which race, but who was this guy's novice
You would
number.
get deeper. You try to out-stump each other.
Yes. And he knew more, for the accolades that I get for remembering stuff, he knew so much more than I did. And when he passed, I figured I needed to create a website and try to retain whatever I remembered, just because he was so good at remembering who did what, he remembered who was teamed with who, which I didn't have time to figure that out, except the factory guys. But he knew Eddie Atkins was riding with, or Jimmy Felici was with Eddie Atkins in '83, and so on. He just knew all the names and behind the scenes stuff.
That's amazing that he knew more than you, because you're the person that I think knows more than anyone.
And he knew more than I did.
Really?
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
But that's another segue here. That's a third hat: racer, promoter, historian.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can we call you a flat track historian?
I like to think I am. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Scott, you think we could put this to a test
Yeah.
here? You think we can stump you, Bert?
I brought a couple of
Stump the chump.
I brought a couple of photos, and I've seen you do this in the past, where you can take a picture and you can sort of identify like maybe where the race was, who the racer is. There's some softballs in here. There's some toughies.
Well, look, before we even get started, Scott, what are these photos here that you got?
These are photos that I've been collecting just because I've just always been into the flat track poster design, collecting photographs. I'll buy stuff at races. When we were building Fuel, I was talking to Dan Mahoney about buying bunch of stuff to put up on the walls there. So I have just a bunch of stuff that I've collected. So I was like digging through the files and pulled out some stuff. So these may be all softballs to you, but
or they may be complete stumpers.
Do you know of the pictures you have in here? Do you know any of the answers?
Some of them have the answers on the back.
Okay.
Show me the back first.
Because he could just be making shit up.
Yeah,
And we're
exactly.
like, wow, this guy's amazing.
Bob Smith from Chicago.
All right, I have a lot. We don't have to look at all
Sure.
of them, but like we'll go through some softballs first.
That's
All right,
Dick
so
Dick Mann on the BSA Gold. No, that's is that the matchless or the BSA Gold Star? But that's Dick Mann. That's NGK written on it. So I think that's probably 63 at Ascot would be my guess.
really,
Scott, what's the answer?
I mean, I know that one's Dick Mann.
Okay.
Plus his number 2. He ran that number for a really long time, right?
He did. He took it over when Dick Klamfoth retired.
Really?
Yep.
Wow.
He was offered after he won number 1 in 1963, and he wore number 1 in 64. They offered him a single digit, and he was teammates with Al Gunter, who was number 3. And he said, "I'll take a single digit as long as it's lower than Al's." And they gave
Really?
him number 2.
That's cool. What a stud.
He was a hell of a guy. He passed away just a few years ago, and I was blessed to be able to meet him twice.
Really?
And I sheepishly went up just to ask him one simple question about, I think the BSA triple, and he talked to me for 45 minutes about all kinds of stuff that I didn't have anything to write down with, so I just absorbed as much as I could, and I went back to my phone and just started taking
that's cool.
notes as quickly as I could.
I have his biography. I started reading it, but I didn't ended up finishing it. I don't remember. Not because it wasn't interesting. It just
Is that Man of Our Times?
Yeah,
That's a cool book.
Yeah.
He signed my copy of it. Awesome.
Here's another one.
Scott Pearson looks like Louisville.
Okay, how do you know that?
How do you know that?
It's a cushion track, so that'd be my guess. It's
Okay.
definitely not when he was. It's got Camel Pro plate, so it's got to be at least 83, and he was on the factory Honda team in 82. So he's either 83, maybe. I can't tell if he's on a Honda or not. Can't tell enough. It looks kind of like a Harley. So it could be 94, 95. No,
Okay.
83, 84, 85 be that time frame.
Okay.
I met him last year at Peoria.
Hmm.
I don't have one on that. This, I'm not sure. I don't know the origin of this photo, and
That's
so
Frenchie LeBlanc from somewhere down in Louisiana, I think he was from. He and Kenny Roberts were two of the best juniors that year of 71.
really.
And then he went out to Ascot and got a traumatic brain injury from a crash,
Oh, really?
and came back to race again, but he was never quite as good again, I believe.
And what are some of the identifying things when you're looking at a photograph like this and you're identifying it? Is the color of the number plate? There's a lot of the number plates back then would have a letter next to it.
Yeah, the letter indicated the district that they came from. So he's the only guy I can think of that was 77L.
Okay.
And the orange plate or the yellow plate means that he was a junior or an amateur. They called it amateur up until 71, then they renamed it junior.
Okay.
But I believe his leathers also say Frenchie down the front. Possibly, I may have saw that later.
Yeah. Now that you pointed out that it's FR.
Yeah,
You couldn't
yeah.
really tell, but
Right. I think his first name was maybe Carl or something like that.
okay.
But because his last name was French,
His last name was LeBlanc.
yeah, but
LeBlanc.
it was French, right?
But a French name.
A French name, yes.
Yeah.
31Y, I'm not familiar with 31Y.
Huh.
But that's
Goes at home.
rider from Northern California is what the Y would be.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Let me see if I got something on that.
When the AMA came up with the professional district lettering system in 1947, they started New England was A, and then it kind of scattered around, and Northern California was Y and Z.
Okay. It's on a two-stroke Bultaco, I think. Rick Hocking.
Really? 31Y is Rick Hocking. There you go. So that would have been, he was a rookie expert in 74, so that would make that 72, which is the first year that they had the white plates for novices.
Oh, really? Awesome.
I'm loving it.
At Ascot TT. Have you ever been there, or did
I
you?
had never
No?
made it to Ascot, no.
This one, I think this is kind of a famous photo. There's a lot of people in this, and they have their names on it, but I'm sure that you could.
That's 1979. You can tell by Corky Keener's leathers. It's the first year he was not on the factory team. Steve Eklund on 11. That's the year that he won the Grand National Championship. 41 is Ricky Graham. 42 is Steve Moorhead, his only year on the factory Harley team, which is why he's wearing the factory colors. And is that 51 up top? Brad Hurst from Oregon.
Wow. Can you see that all right? It's such a great photo. I think
Because they're in formation.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Do you know where it is?
That I do not.
It doesn't say. It's a Dan Mahoney photo, but let's see. How about this one?
That is the late great Dave Hansen. He just passed away yesterday.
Yesterday.
That's,
No way.
Dave Hansen, as an amateur, he's on a Kawasaki 500 two-stroke twin, brakeless at the, I believe that's 1969 San Jose Mile.
No way.
Yeah.
For those watching at home.
He went on to be, he was just inducted into the Trailblazer Hall of Fame last year. He won the 74 Houston TT, and I just saw this morning that he passed away yesterday.
Wow. Well, condolences to Dave's family. A 500 Kawasaki two-stroke.
Two-stroke.
Shazam.
Yeah.
He's riding it with style, too.
Yeah. Well, they had no brakes either, so that was the
Yeah.
only way to slow down.
Wait, that's the other thing. So I was told that you weren't even allowed to have brakes in flat tracking
Correct.
until what year?
They were illegal until 69, then they were optional until 77 or 78.
Wow.
And the reason, when Class C racing came in 1933, the brake technology was so questionable that they decided that for safety, it's better to not have brakes at all than to go into a corner and think you have brakes and then find out you don't.
Ah.
So
okay.
brakes were illegal until 69, and it wasn't until the introduction of the two strokes where people were trying to make two strokes more competitive, because the two-stroke engine really wasn't viable until like 61. There was a GP racer in Europe that had started developing, and they'd figured out the expansion chamber and whatnot. But like with a 4-stroke, you go into a corner and back off the throttle and it slows down. 2-stroke doesn't do that. And so for safety, they were arguing, like in 67, they came out, Dick Mann helped develop the compression release to slow down a 2-stroke because brakes were illegal. And then in 68, the AMA decided that compression release qualified as a brake and therefore was illegal. So they made everyone take the compression releases off, which means now you had guys running into the back of 4-stroke guys.
Right.
And then in the fall of 68 or winter of 68, at the AMA Congress, they voted to include brakes or allow brakes. So predominantly as a safety function so that 2-strokes could race safely against 4-strokes.
Incredible. What a different time. We have time for a couple more?
How are we doing on time? Plenty of time. We're crushing it.
All right. Let me see if well, here, I'll show this to you.
That's Roger Riemann on the inside on a KR, and not sure who's on the outside. Not sure if that's, I don't remember if that's 20 or 20X or 20R. I'm not sure if that's maybe Shell. I don't think Shell threw it. I know he was a tuner. I don't know if he was a.
Looks like an R.
Okay. But I'm drawing a blank on the 20R.
Right. We
pretty
got one.
good.
We got one.
All right.
We got one.
That-
Scott
and
1.
that's
Bert
probably-
Sumner 7.
Roger Ryman, Elliot Schultz.
Elliot Schultz. That means he's
That-
on probably the Royal Enfield.
Okay.
Way back when.
Really?
Yeah.
There was Enfields back
There
then.
was Royal Enfields back in the 60s. Yeah.
Get out.
Yep.
That's pretty cool. Here's another one. We got a couple more.
That 51X is Dennis Carnegie. Don't know how to pronounce his last name. And 72N is Mike Kidd, the 1981 Grand National Champion. Those looks like Mike's got his amateur plates on. He's riding a Yamaha, so that would be 1971. That looks like Ascot.
For those of you watching at home. A lot of photos from Ascot. No, Ascot was like one of the big spots, right?
Yeah, that was Ascot on the West Coast and Santa Fe in Chicago were the two big because they had like weekly programs.
All right.
And so guys could go and race every week and either get a lot of points or get really banged up.
Ascot had cars too, though.
They did.
Did
right.
Santa Fe have
Santa
cars?
Fe ran all kinds of cars
Oh,
all
really?
year long too, right?
Okay.
They used to send out a schedule that was checkerboard, and every day of the week was a different type of racing that was going. They would do figure eights, they would do late models, they do, I don't know if they had sprint cars back then, but it was like some different kind of different kind of race going on.
They sell
They used to
beer
do-
back then too?
Yep, they did demo derbies, they did
Sounds like a
figure
wild time.
eights
They were racing it almost every day.
almost every day at Santa Fe. Yeah.
It's amazing. Well, this one I think is easy.
Yeah, that's my brother Jim. That's at the 1992 Syracuse Mile, and that was his favorite picture.
Really?
Yeah, when he got that from Dave Hayting, he was tickled pink at how
His body position?
everything,
Really?
even from the point of the right boot is pointed in the direction that you're going as you're supposed to do. He thought that was, I think he thought that he'd kind of made it when he saw that photo. He was
Right.
just
Well, he's
really,
a national number at that point, yes?
He was, yes. He earned his national number. He finished fifth at the DuQuoin Mile National, the 600 National in 1990. And so he got national number 45 for 1991. And then he started riding an XR 750 for the shop that he worked at. And then by 92, he made his first Grand National at Springfield in the fall.
Wow.
And
That's amazing.
that was in July, I think, of 92. That photo was.
Is there a story behind 45?
No, my dad actually, when he was racing amateur, raced 45. But the story that I remember was that the AMA called the house to find out what number he wanted. He was at work, and Dad said, "What's the lowest number they have that's available?" And they said 45, and he said, "We'll take that one."
Okay. Nice.
And for those that don't know, tell us about your brother.
Well, he's dead now, Jim.
Well, but
But
Yeah.
there's more to it than that.
Sure, sure. So my brother and I, we used to race bicycles in the backyard, like our own little Santa Fe Speedway. And in '79, we started racing flat track. My dad had started racing in like '66. I came along in '68. My brother in '70. '79, we were 9 and 7. Started racing. Our first race was at Brown Deer Park, an ice race, track about the size of this table.
How old were you at that time? In your first motorcycle?
79, I would have been 10,
Okay.
and he was 8 at the time.
What were you guys racing?
I had an Italjet 80, and he had an Italjet 50.
Wow.
My
Same
80 had a low pipe, so I was really stylish. had a 10 by 12 plate on the front like that. Looked awesome.
All right.
Yeah.
Went black the wind a little bit.
It looked like a
Yeah.
like a flat track.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
at the time, the district racing was motocross in a circle. We didn't have. In fact, most of the bikes rode knobby tires, and most of the tracks were all torn up.
Really?
And it was literally motocross in a circle. And it wasn't until sidebar here. Aztlan Cycle Club, back then to race the amateur nationals, you had to qualify. You had to go to a qualifying event and finish in the top whatever your class in order to be invited to the amateur nationals. 81, 81. Aztlan Cycle Club put on a qualifier at the end of the year, and it rained out. And so the AMA said, well, the nationals are in 2 weeks, so everyone who signed up gets to go to the nationals. So a whole bunch of District 16 people went over to the nationals. And the short track national was held at Niles Sports Forum in Niles, Michigan, and it was a hard-packed, oiled short track. And most of us went over with knobby tires. And they don't work well on hard-packed. And so that winter, and my brother and I both had flat track tires on our bikes. Neither of us made the main, but those guys they were in a different league than us anyway. Right. And we didn't have tracks like that to learn on anyway. But then that off season, my dad, who was the district ref, put forward that all rear tires on the amateur classes have to be dirt track tires on the back. And he was crucified and vilified, and what a horrible, horrible person. Fast forward, 5-6 years, there's dozens of, a dozen or so guys. At one point, I think there was 8 national numbers from Wisconsin, 8 or 9. And it was just within a couple of years of that.
It just the skill level just kind of skyrocketed.
Well, you take off the knobby tires, and now suddenly the tracks can be groomed into shape a little bit nicer.
Right.
And then you start getting the blue grooves, and you start getting the ability to broad slide. And now when you go to a track that is hard packed, it's not a complete different universe.
Right.
And then it wasn't long after, so Jim got his national number. Bob Buffington from Prairie du Chien had his national number. Steve Caston from Hately had his national number, and then more and more and more guys started getting in. J.R. Schnabel being one of them that not only got his national number but won 9 Grand National events.
Right.
We'll go back. Your brother and you were racing at Brown Deer.
Yep. Sorry.
So finish that trajectory. You're telling us about your brother.
Yeah.
So then we just started racing the amateur series, and at that time it was Aztlan, and it was the Beaver Cycle Club. The Fond du Lac did our first half mile was at the Fond du Lac half mile in '82. We were also doing ice racing, so we were going down to like Mineola Bay, Northern Illinois, ice racing every weekend in the winter time, as well as much as we could in the summertime. And then when we turned 16, we got our pro license. So I got my pro license. I was in the last novice class of 1985, and then they eliminated that class and called it Pro-Am after that, and he got his Pro-Am license in 86. And then I moved up to junior in mid-86. He moved up to junior in 87. And then he moved up to expert in 87. And then in 88, I moved up to expert. And then I think in 89, Dad moved up to expert. Or maybe I was junior both 87 and 88. During that time, I also joined the military, and so I was in Oklahoma racing down there and got to race. I was traveling. I was not only racing right off post, but then I'd also drive 3 hours to go race down in Texas with those guys, and those guys were fast. And so I got a little bit better racing with better people, right? You elevate yourself to the talent level that you're around.
Right.
And in the meantime, he had teamed up with Stan Millard, and they were traveling the country and doing great things. And then he got his national number and started riding the 750 more and more and more. And
Wait, who's Stan Millard?
Stan Millard was a guy from Janesville who was known for building BSA singles.
Okay.
And so my novice year, I rode a 1971 BSA single in the novice class against all these high-dollar wood road taxes and stuff. And I got 35 of the 40 points I needed. The next year, Jim took over the ride, and I built a Suzuki that never really worked. And then he just took to it like a duck to water and was just, lights out. His very first race, he went out and I was telling him, well, it's going to be tough. These guys are really tough in the pro division. And he went out and won his heat race on the first time out. And,
awesome.
you know, I remember he won Elkhorn twice that year as a pro-am. And as a junior, he was leading the regional at Pecatonica. And when he crashed off turn 2, he was the difference, you know, we both grew up, we both were given all the same opportunities by our dad. You know, he didn't favor any one of us. And yet Jim was just better, and it's because I treated it as a hobby and he didn't.
Right.
You know, he watched any Sunday and said, that's what I'm going to do.
Right.
And, you know, he crashed and just went, well, that's part of life. And I crashed and went, man, that hurts. I don't want to do that anymore. And so, you know, he was able to have some success at the Grand National level. He made 10 Grand Nationals in his career. And fortunately and unfortunately, you know, there's highs and lows that come with everything, right? Every year he would start off the year really fired up about how the year's going to go, and then things don't quite work out the way you think it's going to go, and you get kind of bummed out, and then you try to regroup the next year. And May of 2002, we went down to Springfield. My sisters and I both went. My parents did not, but it was the first time I think the 4 kids had all been at a race together. And he went out for 1 lap of practice and got into an incident and never recovered. Fortunately, my parents weren't there. Fortunately, we were all there. Rough way to go, but then again, you know, he went out. He was at his favorite racetrack, riding his favorite bike. He was fully motivated about how the day was going to go. He just freshened up the engine, or had someone freshen up the engine. He was all motivated and, you know, ready to go. That's the bad thing of racing motorcycles, is that the risk is pretty high. And whenever I talk to people who are, you know, and he never really talked about retirement. I would talk about, you know, maybe it's time for you to hang up and do something else, but there was nothing else. He couldn't believe it when I told him I was quitting racing, because what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to go to college and get an engineering degree and go do that, which then gave us the money to buy an XR, which then he was able to go and do great things with. But whenever I hear people kind of on the fence about retiring, I always tell them, if you're even thinking about it, you should, because the risk is so great, you know.
How old were you when you stopped racing?
I stopped racing at in the fall of '91, so I was 22 years old.
So you were talking to him about retiring, and how old was he when he passed?
He was 32 when he passed.
Oh, okay. He was older than you.
No, he's 2 years. He's a year and a half behind me, but he kept racing another 10 years.
Yes.
Another decade.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And he probably would have. And I have a hard time envisioning how he would be here today, seeing how the sport has changed.
Right.
He'd be a grumpy ex-racer. But I don't know how he would have retired. My dad kept racing years and years and years and years until he had, and even after he had that accident where he broke all of his ribs and he was, you know, laid up for 18 months. And as soon as he was better, he went out racing again.
He went back out again. I remember with that. I was like, Al.
Right. And
it was the worst case for your father. Not his ribs broke, and then they grew back wrong.
They grew back wrong.
Like some other ribs were wrong. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. They grew back together
sideways.
Like this. Yeah. They grew back together like this, and they had to re-break them.
Oh,
and
man. He was in a lot of pain for a long time recovering from that. I couldn't believe when he wanted to go back out again.
Yeah.
I want to end though on a positive note, because your brother's passing has been the inspiration for your family ultimately to continue promoting and doing things in his name. Is that right? Is that fair?
Sure. Yeah. I remember having a conversation with Jim, obviously before he passed, where he said, "Boy, I wish that there was a race, and maybe it could be Plymouth, where we could bring guys like Kenny Coolbeth and Willie." 59. Come on, Willie McCoy, Mike Hacker, and those guys. You know, the guys from the sport, Joe Kopp and so on. It'd be cool if they could come,
right?
And you know, not only could my friends come and watch and see what I do, but they could see really good guys race,
right?
And so, you know, what I do with the Dairyland Classic is I try really hard to get those guys to come and you know, because it's what Jim wanted to have, was to have those kind of guys, and to not to take anything against, you know, the local races that go on, but you know, you can see the local racers any weekend.
Yeah,
but
it's a different kind of event.
Right. You can't always see a Jared Mees. You can't always see a Cody Kopp. You can't always, you know, see the factory Honda team pull into a pit area. But, you know, when the stars align, they come and support us,
Right.
and that's super cool.
Yeah, it is super cool. Well, having a big purse helps, right?
Sure.
And the Dash for Cash is always a great race for the
Money
fans.
helps.
And
Money helps motivate everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. But also it's that we put on a really good
do.
racetrack, and we put on a very good show. And I can remember standing at the track one year, and Kenny Coolbeth had come up, and he's a factory Harley rider, and he's the #1 plate, and he pulls up, and he comes up to say hi to me, and how's it going? And I'm like, well, there's a spot over there we got to fix. And then I'm pointing out all the problems on the track, and he goes, Bert, this is better than any place we go to on the national circuit. You're just fine, just relax.
Yeah.
But I was still hyper focused on all these little things. But yeah, so
That's cool.
So and part of why I am the way I am is because I don't want to let him down.
Right, of course.
So that is, a constant reminder of, if I do this, is Jim going to like it? If I do that, would Jim approve if I did this or that?
Right.
And, and a lot of people, a lot of the local racers, they want to be able to call the shots, and that's not the show I want to put on.
Yeah, exactly.
It's no different than what you guys do with Flat Out Friday. And I've said this to any promoter, and I probably said it to you early on. You have to have your vision of what you want to do. And you got to stick to it, because as soon as you say I'm doing this, you're going to get all the you gotta do this, and you got to run that,
Sure.
you got to do a this class and a that class and a mini this and a hooper that and blah blah blah, and then it stops being. At some point, you step back and go, what is this?
Yeah.
I didn't want this. I wanted.
Yeah, I
something
had a
else.
vision, and then somehow it got run
It
off.
got bastardized
Right.
by trying
Yeah.
to, and you guys, I'm sure, have seen it. If you run this class, you're going to get 1 million of them. And then you run the class and you get 2 of them.
Right.
You're like, this was not worth the time
Right.
or the effort.
Yeah.
And so and that's a key thing that I tell any promoter that bothers to listen to me is you got to have your vision, you got to stick to it, because you're gonna suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune from everyone that I think it comes down to jealousy. They're jealous of what people like us do because we make it look easy, but it's not easy. You put a hell of a lot of effort into it, and for them to come up at the 11th hour and go, you know what I think? No, I don't really care what you think.
Exactly. And we were start talking about this before we walked in. It just becomes a lunatics running the asylum
Yes.
situation,
Yes.
and then nobody's happy.
Right. And I remember when I first got into promoting that people would come and go, oh, have you ever heard of this guy? Oh, this guy, he's a real jerk, and he treats the riders like crap, blah, blah, blah. And I thought, boy, I'd never do that to a rider. But then after 20 years, you go, I know exactly why why he reacted the way he did, because you're a you're a blankety blank as well. Go away.
Yep.
Well, all right, Bert, we got to wrap it up. I really appreciate. We always say this, but you more than ever. I think we could continue on with another time.
Yeah.
With another. Again, we talked about all the hats you wear. I've only gotten to half of the hats that you wear, and what you do for the sport, and who you are as a person. We're going to save that for another time.
I would really love to have you back on, and maybe we could do something with like.
I told your dad too that I'd like to get him back on. Let's sneak you on here with your dad.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
I'd like to see
listen,
that dynamic.
Yeah, listen
Sure.
to you guys talking, or Dubler, or
Hollywood?
someone,
Hollywood, yeah.
or like I don't know, maybe you could suggest a guest, and you guys we would just sit back and just let you guys talk about. Wait, what about the guy who wrote the? I know this is we're trying to wrap it up, but the guy who wrote the flat track book, Pearson.
Greg Pearson, he's a friend of mine.
Yeah. Be fun to have both of you guys on here sometimes. Does he travel very much?
No, he's from West Virginia. He and my other history friend, Bob Herrick, out of Lansing, Michigan.
Okay.
He doesn't travel a whole lot, but we try to get together at Lima every year and
Oh, really?
just hang out, watch race, and talk history. And
That's
watch
cool.
race and
Well,
talk history.
maybe next year we'll go to Lima, and we'll
bring
sit
the
down.
podcast.
Yeah, we'll bring the podcast there, and we'll get you guys in a room and just let you guys rip, because
Awesome.
I think that would be such a great historical
Documentation.
document.
Yes.
And wait. Also, I would say I know we're trying to wrap it up. I have one more.
It's okay.
When Jared came and raced this year, and he's also a promoter as well as a racer. Do you cultivate relationships with other promoters and other racers? Specifically, I guess Jared, if you're going to Lima, do you guys talk about stuff? You could talk about.
We Jared and I he's one of the few promoters that I kind of talk to, but we've kind of he's never asked me for opinions, but there are times we'll just bounce ideas off.
Right.
Hey, what are you doing with this, or what do you think about that?
Yeah.
He's a smart guy.
Yeah, super
anyway, he's the best racer of this generation, and I'm just blessed that I've been able to have that relationship with him when I met him in 2003, and he's been a tremendous supporter of ours for many years. And
Runs great events.
he runs a hell of an event. He took over Springfield, I think, the year or two ago. So he runs Lima and he runs Springfield. But it's always cool to wake up in the morning and see a text message from Jared saying, "I'll see you tonight," which is what happened this year at the Dairyland Classic, which was just I was fighting depression with my that week, and that really kind of set me back on the top. But
that's so cool.
Yeah. He's I enjoy talking to him any chance I get.
Yeah, great guy, great asset to the sport.
Absolutely. He's a hell of a guy.
Yeah.
And his wife does a great job with the promoting as well.
Okay, cool.
And you're not so bad yourself, sir.
Well, thank you.
We're clapping it up for Bert Sumner.
All right, Bert. Thanks a lot. Really appreciate you coming on. I would really love to do some more of this. So
anytime.
Let's do it.
I'm happy to talk anytime someone wants to listen.
All right. Fantastic. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. Thank you a bunch, guys.